Hi, and welcome back to Baking and Brewing with Bob and Dominique. We're back for another tasting episode today.
Got some special treats for you today, including this special beer.
We did something that we've never done before, which is use decarboxylated marijuana.
Say what? I know.
It's true. We aged this on decarboxylated marijuana that was baked for about 2 hours at 220 degrees Fahrenheit. We used about a pound of marijuana and aged the beer on it for about 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, it definitely puts a different character to what resiny beer is like.
Agreed. You know, when people say dank, man, this IPA is so dank. They're really talking about weed. This beer is the dankest beer ever brewed. Yes, you will get lifted, but more from a body height standpoint. Interesting, the beer isn't actually too cloudy, which is kind of fun. It was actually brewed with Kolsch yeast, so I was actually expecting kind of a hazy IPA thing, if you will, there.
Yeah, but we did leave it for 3 weeks. There was quite a bit of re-fermenting going on, and then it just...
Interestingly enough, I know that you've probably watched a couple of our episodes thus far. When we did the Provoke episode, you watched the hops almost be consumed by the yeast the moment they touched the beer.
That's true.
When the marijuana touched this beer, the bubbles took a little bit longer to enact and then kept going
For a lot longer.
for longer. Almost slower too. It was an interesting aspect. The pace of the bubbles was slower, almost making you think like the yeast was high.
Yeah, moving slowly but still active.
A lot of people have been approaching this beer with a little bit of caution. You take it at your own risk. I think one of the things that I can say is that if you do get drug tested, this is not the right beer for you.
And if you don't really like the taste of weed, this is definitely not the beer for you.
Yeah, this round came out a little bit closer to, say, an edible style. We didn't necessarily use top-selling buds, if you will, there. We used more shake.
Yeah.
And so I think in recipes to come, we'd probably use some nicer whole bud that was ground and then decarboxylated. It might also allow us to use a little bit less. I know one of the things that was true for this re-fermentation was that it was kind of gunky. We had to kind of clean it out a couple of times because yeast and byproduct had shot up into the bubbler once or twice during the re-ferment.
It was an interesting first trial of R&D to make a weed beer. Definitely has calmed down a bit since we first tapped it though.
Yeah, not as like, weed.
Yeah, instead of a hop bomb, it was definitely a resin bomb. And it's cooled down a little bit. It's got a little bit more citrus notes to it too.
Yeah, it's coming back to becoming an IPA again, if you will. This was brewed, the name of this beer when it first started was All Systems Critical IPA. And, well, you know, the fact that it has weed in it kind of, you know, it affects your system a little bit in there, if you will. The reason why it's called All Systems Critical is that during the brew day, the temperature controller on our grain father broke. And so we had to kind of re-engineer our way around the day. We've since figured out a good workflow. And then also the product is still under warranty, so we'll be changing out that part soon enough here.
Yeah, but a little MacGyvering here and there is kind of goes hand in hand when you're home brewing.
So you saying you're getting a little bit of citrus off of this, obviously that piney, resinous dankness.
Yeah, it's crazy though compared to what it tastes like now versus, I don't know, maybe like 6 days ago. A lot more palatable. Maybe it's just because I know what to expect going into it. I remember
True.
The first time I tried it I took a sampler glass because it was just so pungent.
Yeah, it had a much even, like, there was like I still get a fair amount of weed character on the nose, but it could fill the room with smell as though somebody just opened a weed jar, if you will, when it was first poured.
It's nice to see how it evens out over time. I'm curious if it's gonna bottom out before we can finish it. I'd like to see what happens.
It'd be very interesting because this beer, I'm already getting that much more of a malty note as well from that Kolsch yeast.
Aftertaste, at least, yeah.
Yeah, and so it does have a very, like, it's much more drinkable than it was before. It had a very strong sense of all right, let me power through this edible because it's not necessarily the best tasting thing I've ever had, just to get the effect.
It was crazy.
And now that that's kind of mellowed out, it is definitely that much more of an enjoyable, drinkable beverage.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I generally drink slower than you, but especially with this beer, I'm pretty slow to drink it just because it overwhelms your mouth at certain times. I like to appreciate the complexities of the maltiness, but with this beer, the weed overcomes a lot of it. So I end up just tasting weed.
Even though this beer is relatively dry, it's not too dry. I think I would definitely plan on putting some maltodextrin in this beer as well to kind of balance some of that dankness with sugar. Through the use of maltodextrins, those dextrins themselves will help not only with body, but also just a slight little sweet note that will help balance any sort of maybe some of those bitter notes that you get from the fact that it wasn't just flowers because it was shake. So that means there's leaves. There might even be a little bit of stems in there, which can sometimes create a slight bitter note.
Yeah, I'm curious if we do use better weed, if we'll get more floral characteristics out of it, because this was probably more stemmy than not.
And now for beer number 2. Cheers.
This beer, I really enjoy a lot more.
This beer is one of those beers to be proud of. This is a second iteration of a beer that was brewed about a year and a half or so ago for Easter. At that time, it was called the Passion.
It was.
It's still called the Passion now, but this time around we used different yeast. So the first time around we used Vermont ale yeast. Actually quite flocculent. I was trying to create kind of like a hazy IPA with passion fruit thing going on there. Couldn't have been clearer for what I was expecting, if you will. This beer is clear for a different reason. So I actually kind of liked the clearness when I ended up thinking about it. And I decided to add pectic enzyme to the secondary to make sure that the resulting beer would be as clear as possible and that there wouldn't be any fruit haze in the resulting fruited beer.
I think it helped a lot in keeping the passion more available when you're drinking the beer. You can taste the fruit, you can taste the sourness, you can taste a little bit of the bitterness. For those of you who are familiar with passion fruit, I'm sure those are the exact 3 things that you look for when you taste the passion fruit. It still has that bitterness, so you have to expect that.
One of the reasons why I wanted to use passion fruit is that Dominique herself is actually not a sour beer fan.
I'm not. I don't like something that's too tangy when I have a beer. I used to have this joke where it's kind of not still available to use because of the recent trends, but if I wanted a sour beer, I would have drinking kombucha in the past, because that's basically what kombucha is. All kombucha has a little bit of alcohol in it, number 1, and all kombucha is pretty sour because of the yeasts.
The yeast that's used in kombucha, which is the same yeast that's used in sour beers, is lactobacillus. Yeah. There's also pediococcus that can be used in a sour beer, as well as 1 or 2 other mixed cultures that get used for sour beers. The concept of a sour beer is a spoiled beer. And so, I could definitely empathize with a lot of the reasons why Dominique wouldn't necessarily, in theory, agree with drinking sour beers. This beer has an incredibly sour note that is more tart than I would say sour.
There's a difference. There's definitely a difference between tart and sour. Tart has a nice little, salty aspect to it, I want to say, even. It's a pucker effect.
I think some sour beers have a tendency to have a slight acetobacter taste, which is...
And I just don't dig the aftertaste. I love drinking a beer and breathing out in my mouth and tasting that aftertaste that you can get from a beer, a good beer.
So this still has a nice sweet note, but it is still balanced. One of the things that helps balance it is the tartness. Also, using a Saison yeast is going to helped us dry this beer out so that it is highly drinkable. It has almost like I don't want to say a cider note, but there is that element of fruit in there, and the dryness of it makes you want to keep coming back for more and more tastes.
It doesn't cling to your mouth. The sweetness, You taste it and it goes.
That's a great point. I think that's really what you may be getting at when it comes to sour beers. Because myself, and this may be just because that most of the sour options that I've tried in the past have contained gluten, but there is a slight filminess that happens where you might want to take your time when you're drinking that sour beer as opposed to this beer, which has a very, very palatable taste. And not only that, but the mouthfeel is great. You still get a lot of malt.
That's true.
But that fruit comes there right on the back end and it really helps kind of complete that tasting profile that I'm looking for in a highly drinkable beer. Yeah. Especially one with fruit, because I'm not usually the type that's going to reach for a fruited beer. So I want to make sure it's a beer that I want to drink.
It also smells like fruit. I like to have a little bit at the beginning, different taste in the middle, and then have those very similar tastes at the end. I think that's a sign of a well done beer, is where you can smell it and you can barely taste that smell, and then you drink it, you get another part of the beer, and then the aftertaste is that smell again, but you're actually tasting it.
One of the things that's interesting to me about this beer is the element where when it didn't have any carbonation, when we were tasting it coming out of the fermenter, I literally said the phrase, "This tastes like juice." And it's very interesting because of the fact that it really has taken on a completely different characteristic once we've added the carbonation. And I think that's really what helps it be that much more drinkable as well. It really brings a lot of those extra notes out, specifically the fruitiness. Extra surface area from the bubbles in the beer really create that volatileness with flavor compounds like the fruit notes.
It opens it up.
Creates more surface area for that smell to fill your nose.
Yeah, there's a big difference between non-carbonated and carbonated beer. I mean, in volume alone. So you can imagine what it does, what it transcribes to when you taste it. Big thing is the surface area part. It opens it up. So that way you can taste more of it versus it being dense like an apple juice per se.
We're very much enjoying this beer. We're very excited to have you on the show with us, and with whatever you're drinking. Maybe you have your own version of a passion fruit Saison and you're drinking along with us.
Let us know if you prefer to use fruit purees, raw fruit, whole fruit, or extracts.
Then frozen fruit is also an option. This is the first beer that we've done from inception to digestion on the show.
That's true. This was the first beer that we showed you guys brewing, and then we pitched, and then we were drinking.
Cheers to you.